Well, welcome back, one and all, for yet another installation of talking about Milan Kundera's identity. Today we're talking about student paper number 2. But before we do that, I'll remind you of a few dates. One is that the final draft of the identity paper is due May 6th, which is a week from today. And then a week after that, on the 13th, will be the final due date for everything in the course. Next week we'll primarily be going over the final, and I'll probably be going over that on either Wednesday or Thursday. So probably I'm looking at my last transmission on Thursday, where I will give you information about how the final is going to work. Also, I should send you at that point in time a link to where you can do online evaluations, should you see the need or the desire to do so. But in any case, that's what we have coming up here in the next week or so. We're getting really close to the end, so for those of you who have been procrastinating, it's not a good time to wait any longer. Let's talk about this student paper number 2, which is again a very energetic approach to writing this paper. You see, this one's quite a bit more imaginative than the last one. The last one was quite simple with its 3 sections of reality and then fantasy and then dream. This particular paper is similar in the respect that it has 3 sections, but instead of having a reality, fantasy, and dream section, it has a reality scene, a reality section in the early part of the book, okay? And I'm just going to use an R here to represent that, where they meet at the café scene in Normandy. And then there's a short period of time where up until chapter 6, so here's chapter 6, when you see they're out on the beach and there's the sailcar episode, and that sailcar episode represents the beginning of what the author refers to as a near-death experience. Okay? And that continues throughout a good portion of the book until we get to nearly the end, and we get to the train going down into the tunnel. Okay, so let's call it here, all right, train and tunnel. And then when it comes out the other side, you are in what the author posits as near-death experience number 2. Okay, so much of it is in near-death experience number 1, which is, the author makes a difference between these two, as near-death experience number 1 is kind of a more joyful life review process where you can go back and look at everything and kind of reflect on the strengths and weaknesses of your experience and maybe learn from them should you be called back from the light, so to speak. Near-death experience number 2 is where things turn darker and more stormy. It's a negative experience where you've basically given in to the fact that you're not going to come out of this and that you are indeed dead. So, I mean, it's a very unique and interesting approach to think about this book. There's a lot of work done here, particularly through symbolism, to show that, there's symbolism to illustrate that she is dead. There's a lot of darkness and death metaphors. The death of her child is something that she's attached to and wants to bring her back. And this is also brought out by the fact that early in the book it talks how she has a strong connection with the present, and and this is of course fuel for this writer, this author, to look at this whole experience in the book as her kind of fading after she has this terrible sailcar accident, which is an interesting reading of that scene, that it really did happen, right? Even though we're told it doesn't. And then, that kind of manifests itself in these, slipping away into the deep dark. Now, the paper doesn't really formally resolve this. It kind of leaves it hanging out there that she's indeed dead. However, when we come back in chapter 50 and Jean-Marc is calling Chantal, 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 presumably one could read that as a reawakening from a coma or some sort of non-conscious state after the accident, and then she recovers and continues on. But I don't think that that's stated in the paper per se. It's just kind of understood that that's what's happening. So in any case, that's pretty much what this paper is about. There's a few places where it gets a little bit, it takes too many liberties, quite honestly, and gets off the topic a little bit, starts to veer into talking about some heavy symbolism and recurring imagery through the book. All of that, tends to fog things a little bit and adds length to the paper, which it didn't really need, right? This paper is about 2,200 words. And then, I think, basically confuses things a little bit and really isn't necessary. The only reason that I like to look at it is because at least the author had the forethought to exert some control over that, so that when the author did write about that recurring imagery or symbolism, it all seems to come back in the service of talking about whether it's near-death experience 1 or near-death experience 2. Setting up and rationalizing why certain sections of the book are what they are, which is, which is what the essay is about, and can be kind of a difficult thing to do for this book because it is so slippery in making a definitive claim about how the book works. Of course, again, like I said before, that's exactly what I want you to try to get in the habit of when you write, is not necessarily figuring everything out and then beginning to write, but trusting yourself that if you jump in and start associating certain kinds of, or imposing certain kinds of order onto the text, then, you have to trust yourself that you're going to be able to sort this all out. It doesn't all happen in your head. It happens later, as you're writing the paper. I think you figure these things out. Even with this paper, you'll see at the beginning, the first paragraph in the intro is a rather long and lengthy discussion of the roadmap or timeline of the book. By the time the paper is over at the end, the author neatly condenses what the movement from section to section is. So the thoughts become clearer as you start to write. And you just have to hold on to that definition that you're putting forth for the particular paper. And that's the whole idea of a thesis. Okay, so that's that. Again, next Thursday, May 6th, that's when this final draft will be due. And then we'll be into talking about the final at that point in time. Take care, and we'll see you Thursday.